I truly, in every sense of the word, think that this is one of the most interesting and difficult conversations I've ever had with anybody on the show so far. I think that it's challenged my perception about the world in the sense of how I view good, how I view evil, and how I can reconcile with both these concepts to begin with. And I sincerely hope that it does the same for anybody who listens.
Yo, Jackplex, answer the fucking phone, dude.
Hello?
Jack.
All right, so tell me a little bit about your nuclear family.
Okay, so there was my parents. They never got married. And my mom called off the wedding after a mental breakdown about 3 days before the wedding. She ran away with me when she was pregnant and came back when I was born, showed me to my dad and was like, "This is what I named your daughter. Here's your kid." And then my dad married my stepmom and my mom married my stepdad. My stepdad and mom had two kids, my half siblings, and then my dad with my stepmom had my sister, who is the only sister I still talk to. For growing up for most of my life, I spent half the time with my mom and half the time with my dad. My dad's house was amazing. I loved my dad's house. I didn't get along super great with my stepmom, but that was very minor, normal kid things. And it was not a bad home. I had toys and a good bed and everything I could ask for. And my problems were normal there. And then my mom's was the bad house. It was the abusive home. And it was just crummy. But my childhood, I will admit, wasn't all bad.
So it was, as you said before, it was your mom's house. It was your mom and your stepdad that were the abusive household.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, real quick, I want to kind of go to your father. So when you're talking about your parents and how they were going to get married and then stopped, did he ever talk about the reasoning as to why your mother might have done that?
Yes, actually. So back when I was a kid, I asked both of them myself, and they both gave me different reasons, and neither reason makes sense, if that makes any sense. So I don't really know. My dad, when he was talking about it, he gave me a much more detailed version. And he told me how she would break down crying and would scream at him for no reason. And she'd have just these total mental breakdowns. And he tried to help her and figure out solutions. My dad's always been very much a, what's the issue? Let's make a solution together kind of person. So I believe that he would do that. And then my mom was always very fanatic and just had issues. So the reason he gave was she flat out told him that she didn't like that he didn't act like a man and take control of the house and them as a couple. And my mom, when I asked her, she told me that she just didn't have the feelings that she felt she should. And so she called off the wedding.
Do you honestly in your heart think that there's like, not that they're lying, but there's still some type of like misunderstanding between the two of them?
I don't know. I held a lot of resentment as a child, to be honest, that I was the only kid from them, and I felt a lot like an outcast, and my dad worked very hard not to make me feel like that. But because of my mom's house, I don't know. It's not something I've dwelt too much on now that I have more distance from it. And that resentment, but as a kid, I would say yes. As an adult, I would say I don't know.
The more and more we talk, it seems as though your father seems to be the more reasonable person and seems to be more of a safe place for you during the time of your childhood.
Yes, to be honest, even as an adult, I idolize him. He's always been my safe space. even now. I would credit him with saving my life from this. Well, it's a bit of a more darker turn, but he's probably the reason I didn't, try to kill myself more than I did as a kid. I had hope and something to go home to, so to speak.
You just seem like you're kind of like caught in the middle, and you have like this really bad space, which is your mother's space. Then you have like this good space they're talking about, which is your father's space. And then you also have these siblings on your mom's side. I want to talk a little bit about these siblings. Did you guys ever get along?
I did a lot with my brother, to a point. I was kept at a distance by my parents from both of them. So I had issues with my siblings and my relationship caused by our parents, and they would do things like let's say I have my birthday, or it's Christmas or a holiday or something where I'd get gifts, or it's supposed to be somewhat at least about me, or at least about our family, and I'd get those things, but the spotlight would be mainly on them. They'd get all the nice things, and the few things that I did get would be taken away and given to them within a week.
For anybody who's listening that doesn't have siblings, I have two sisters, and I was given I'm very lucky. I was given a very good childhood. Even with the
Really?
childhood, yes, I was very lucky.
Are you the youngest or the oldest?
I'm the youngest.
Oh, got you. My husband's the baby, too.
And so even with the lucky childhood, the good childhood that I've had, even if I felt like I wasn't getting a lot of attention, it does affect you as a kid. It affects you in so many different ways. And that's me with a good experience and a good childhood. So I could only imagine having that experience too, with these gifts and not getting the proper attention. It's already bad enough in and of itself. That can cause a lot of resentment as you grow up and furthermore. But, as you were saying,
I got along with my siblings, sort of. My brother was closer. Me and my brother would go and play together a lot more than me and my little sister. Me and my brother did not like my little sister, if I'm going to be honest. It got better as she got older, but there was a lot of resentment because she was the golden child. My brother was not treated the way I was. He was treated very well still, but he still wasn't the favorite. My sister was the favorite. She got all the attention and love, and they'd compliment her while insulting me and my brother. We didn't play with her as much, and she became a lot better when she got older, but I left when she was very young still, to be honest. I got rescued when she was still very young.
Was she favorited because she was the baby, or because again,
she was the youngest.
That was the main
She was
reason.
also she was the youngest, and she was considered the prodigy child. She was very, very smart for her age. Her teachers would say that she was a very intelligent girl. She would get put in special classes and all that, and so she was the prodigy of us, and she was just treated better for it.
Did she get kind of spoiled because of that? Did she treat you and your brother differently?
Oh, absolutely. She would use it to her advantage, absolutely. She would... So this is a normal sibling problem, but it became dangerous for me because of the beatings and stuff and how my parents would react to this. But it would be like the normal sibling where you're goofing around with them and then someone gets hurt and you're like, don't cry. But she would go and then tattle on us, or she'd make up situations if she didn't get what she wanted, and she'd go tell on us. She was a big, big tattletale. And she'd get me in trouble, and getting in trouble was, well, it was deadly. It was very dangerous to be in trouble in my house.
Were your siblings aware of how bad it could be for you?
To a point.
Were you exclusively the child that was treated so badly?
Yes. My brother got beatings, but not even 1/4 of what I got. He didn't get beat as often. He didn't get screamed at as often. Neither of them got molested. Neither of them. It would be impressive if I went more than a few days without a beating. And
what do you think the reasoning was that they singled you out in particular? Was it because of the fact that you were the half sibling?
I think it was for a number of reasons, actually. That was part of it. So I'm actually going to get into his attraction to me. My stepfather was a pedophile. I'm very blunt about that. He was a pedophile. And the type of little girls that he's attracted to is very specific, and I fit that very, very perfectly. He was attracted to brown-haired, brown-eyed little white girls. And it specifically had to be brown-eyed, brown-haired white girls. And he was attracted from ages 13 all the way down to toddler years. And so he was very into me in ways that he should not be. And he singled me out very deliberately, I would imagine, and alienated me a lot from my mom and my siblings because it gave him more chances to do things that he should not.
That's so meticulous, and that's so, I mean...
He was a very, very smart man, unfortunately.
And it's sad that we have to use the adjective smart, because in a sense he is, but in a sense that smartness is being used for, I would say, evil.
Evil. One of the things that actually helped me was that, though, weirdly enough. I always wondered when I first got out, why me? My dad actually brought that up. I'm getting a little off track, but he said one time I was crying in the car with him, and I'm like, why me? And he's like, well, sometimes there's just really sick people, and it's not your fault. There's nothing you can do about it, but they're just mentally ill.
Or we've talked about how meticulous and predatory he is in his approach towards you. What were some steps, if you feel comfortable talking about it? Like, how would he go about this?
Back when my first memory of him doing something was, I think I was 2 or 3 years old. I was laying on the bed and watching VeggieTales. That was my big obsession then. I freaking loved VeggieTales. And my mom was down the hall in a shower. I remember being really tired. I was just really tired. I was playing around all day. I was tired. And so I was like half dozing, half watching TV, and he was cuddling up with me. No big deal. This is my mom's husband. And he started touching me. I didn't understand it. I did not know that it was bad. It was just what happened. That's just what happened. That was it. And he acted like nothing was wrong. So I didn't think anything was wrong. I was like 2 or 3. And then it slowly just built up from there. And he would act like it was a secret. And oh, okay, secrets are good. Secrets aren't bad. Mom and Dad make surprises like birthdays for secrets. It wasn't a bad thing in my head. And when I learned that it was bad was I was 6 or 7, maybe. And the reason I learned was, I think we were watching a TV show. And I was with my mom and stepdad, and 2 characters went into the closet and started touching each other. And I'm like, oh, this is what he does. And I spoke up and said something, but it was vague, what I said. And I think my mom misunderstood, and she said, well, that's what mommies and daddies do. Kids don't do that, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, well, okay. So I started asking more deliberate, vague questions, and I started getting a vague idea of, oh, this is bad. Before then, it was just touching. Then I hit age 8. By age 8, I'd already been experiencing beatings since I was a kid. I've already been experiencing these abuse in other very deliberate ways. I was underweight at that age too. I was not in great shape. And by age 8, he raped me for the first time. I remember it was horrible. It was so painful. I think that he actually ripped some parts of me. Quite literally, I was bleeding. I remember it was so painful. I also remember that I realized at that point that it was not okay, and I had gone up to my mom about a year ago when I was 7, and I told her what was going on, and she hit me. She hit me across the face and told me not to lie to her. And so when he actually did it, I actually bit myself so I wouldn't scream. And my little sister and brother were in the room next to me, and I didn't want to make noise. After that, he continued to full-on rape me till I was 13 and I got out.
You know, we talked about how meticulous and how predatory he was. Oftentimes, when I hear of these stories, these people have some sort of like a set schedule or some sort of almost like a daily approach, because the process becomes, in a sense, addictive for the predator.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right, actually. He would come to me at certain times of the day. I also knew his cues, I guess. You know how, like, you watch family members and you know what they want without them speaking it? It's
Yes.
like that, but grosser.
Yeah, even like I live in a 2-story house. I can hear people walking upstairs, and I know exactly who's walking upstairs just based off the sound.
Yeah, no, it's that. He'd have hand signals and body movements that meant things to me, and no, absolutely. He worked on a schedule because I was there for limited time for him. He used that schedule.
I'm assuming that he planned this schedule in a sense that it would minimize any risk of him getting caught.
Yeah. There were times that he broke that, but those were times that I got more aggressive with it, like being like, no, I'm not doing this, but I'd get punished later for it, but it was worth it, I guess. It's not something I like to think about because it makes me scared for my siblings that are still there. And I know that sounds horrible, but there's nothing I can do about it. And it just destroys me mentally. Not thinking about it has been my go-to. He would come and sexually molest me when my mom wasn't there sometimes. This was very rare, by the way. It was very, very, very rare. Only a couple dozen times in these many years. I'd be right next to my little sister, or we'd be in the living room and she'd be asleep, and he would do things right next to her. I would generally walk away and leave, like full on leave outside the house and be gone all night when he did this, and I'd come back in a day or two or in the morning, or I'd go to a friend's house and be like, hey, I just need to crash and blah, blah, blah. I lived in a bad neighborhood, so questions weren't really always asked when they should have been. And even for a kid, it just, they didn't care.
Yeah, it's frighteningly common, and especially I would find even just this is a common phenomenon right now as it stands, right? But as we look further and further, let's say into the 80s and 90s, where communication, so just I guess establishing a little bit of context as to where we are right now in 2022, globalization's on the rise. Everybody has a cell phone. Communication is so readily available that it's become a part of everybody's lives. Pushing back into the 80s and 90s, and even the early 2000s, and even part of the 2010s, you know, I'd say that phones became more of a thing leading up into the 2010s, up until now. Communication was far less frequent, and it was a lot more just based on, like, for example, back in the 90s, 80s to early 2000s, you could leave your house and walk around for a couple hours, and your parents would be cool with it because kids are just supposed to be playing at that hour. Being outside was much more of a common thing. And as globalization began to happen, and we all became so much more interconnected through the internet, which I would even go as far as to say that the internet is just digitized consciousness that we're all connected through at this point.
Absolutely. Well, kids nowadays are always glued to their phones. I'm sure they'll even be more so.
Yes, and this level of communication that we all have, not even just within our own communities, but globally, is going to increase more and more so as we get older. And hopefully, I would say that would put a huge stop on a lot of these abuses because of the frequency of this communication and how easy it is to find things out online. Can I ask what year range you were in your childhood?
So this was in the very early 2000s. Very early 2000s, like 1999 to the 2000s. Just all of them, pretty much.
That's when Nickelodeon was huge, Cartoon Network was huge.
Yeah.
Being outside
I
was being
remember
pushed.
watching those shows back when I was a kid.
And then,
Watching Courage the Cowardly Dog and all that.
Courage the Cowardly Dog, Johnny Bravo.
Oh, yeah. That was
Samurai
that
Jack.
was yeah, that's all my childhood shows. Those are I'm not that old. I'm 25 years old now.
I'm 21. Yeah, so we
That's
we
crazy.
you said that's crazy?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know why, but I pictured you like my age.
I think people tell me that. Actually, people mainly think that 24 or 25 ish.
We were raised about the same times though.
Yeah, so I think that we're pretty much like on the same page when it comes to like a lot of the human experience, I would say at this point in time. So yeah, I can definitely see, unfortunately, how he was able to, in a sense, use that to his advantage.
Oh, absolutely. And we were still able to go out and people minded their business and it wasn't posted everything online. We didn't have TikTok. Facebook was just becoming a thing. We joked and said it was the age of the internet, but it's more now that it is.
Yeah, and even now, as the internet progresses, like it's only in its infancy. Like it's going to get
Oh,
better.
absolutely.
It's as technology just keeps getting better and better at an exponential rate. You can even say just like, for example, Rolex by your phone, and you'll end up getting an ad for a Rolex on whatever social media app that it is that you're using, and it just becomes more and more interconnected.
I've noticed that actually it weirds me out.
Yeah,
Like I've looked up something. How do you know?
yeah, that's a whole nother problem. That's a huge thing. But in a sense, that problem of that interconnectedness, I would hope an unforeseen positive is that it hopefully stops a lot of abuses.
I
And
hope so. I really, really hope so. I never want any child to have to go through even half of what I did. Not even a quarter. I hope in the future we get better as a society.
you know what? I would like to chime in, and I would like to say that I think that a lot of the 20th century, from the 1900s to the 2000s, I think that because of industrialization and the flow of economics at that point in time, everything was focused on capital and everything was focused on working and just being somebody who works and being somebody who provides. But I think that now, as humanity begins to slow and we become more and more interconnected, I think that we're beginning to realize that a huge part of having a good human experience is actually your mental state. So I think that it's particularly during COVID and during 2020, when everything actually stopped and we had to slow down because of lockdown. I think that's why mental health got a huge push, because we actually realized, hey, life isn't all about working. It's about being connected. It's about wanting to be with each other. And I think that's why mental health has been getting a huge push in 2020 and onward. So I do think that this will become less and less of a problem, I hope. And I think that hopefully, with that push happening, pedophiles can get the help that they need. I actually want to get back to that conversation too about how you feel about pedophiles in just a couple minutes. I want to talk about, you were talking about, sleeping over a couple nights and just getting away for a couple nights. How did you process those emotions? Did you ever talk to anybody about it during that point in time? I don't think you did you?
No, not really. I didn't really talk to anyone about what was going on. I was also very scared to talk to anyone about my abuse. There was a lot of threats, I guess, as I got older and I started understanding. For a time period when I was 7-ish, I started getting a little bit more vocal, and he cracked down on me. And that gets into another part of my abuse, actually, that's quite horrifying. The way he cracked down on me was I always was an animal person. I was always an animal person. My parents would always buy me these new pets, these new fun little furry creatures like cats or kittens or dogs or turtles or fish. It varied. I had frogs even at one point. And so I think the first animal that ever this happened with was a frog. And I had started speaking up about the abuse and the beatings and the molestation, and the way he cracked down on it was he killed my pet. He killed my pet. And he did it in front of me and mutilated it. And then he had me dispose of it. And he told me it would happen again if I ever said, well, he called it lies. But it was almost like a gaslighting. I don't know. It's very,
Yes.
It's weird to think about now. But he told me that would happen again, and it did. And he realized it worked. It worked very, very well to terrify me.
Frequent language that's used during this too is things that like, you made me do this, or look at what you made me do, or
Oh,
so and
yes.
such.
Oh, gosh. Yes. You misbehaved, and this is your consequence was the big one. You need
The
to face
language
the
is very,
consequences.
it's very you focused. You.
Yes. And it was just, I believed it was my fault. I believed it. And so I stopped talking about it very quickly. And from then on, every time I misbehaved or I did something or I spoke up even just a little tiny bit, or we had someone come concerned, even if I didn't say anything, I lost a pet. And they'd buy me a pet a week or 2, 3 later.
And the whole time he knew what he could use that it was like using, he would get rid of the leverage just to reuse that leverage.
Yep, and I hate to say it, but they're replaceable. Unfortunately so. They're not financially, they are replaceable. They are not emotionally, but he could go buy another freaking frog for a couple cents, $1. Even a fish is not expensive. A puppy was a little bit more expensive. A kitten was a little bit more expensive. But you can get those free to cheap on Craigslist. And they sometimes did that. I know one of the dogs that they did, they stole from a person across town, and they would kill them. They would kill them in front of me.
And when you say they, you mean your mother and stepdad, or just your stepdad?
It was usually my stepdad that did the killing. And then
Was your mother aware of this?
Yes,
Jesus Christ.
she was. She would, to a degree. I need to describe a situation to even get across how that works. So I'm going to get very gory with this, and I apologize. I don't know how else to. So I was a kid, and I had a kitten named Buddy. He was about a month or 2 old. He was a little kitten, and I was playing with him in the kitchen, and my stepdad came in, and he was furious. He was furious, and I don't remember why, to be honest. It was so long ago, and I don't remember why he was angry, but he was angry. And he took this decorative stone thing, I think it was like a statuette thingy, a paperweight maybe, and he smashed and crushed my kitten's skull in front of me. There was blood all over me. There was blood on the floor. My kitten was seizing. Its body was twitching. I was freaking the hell out. I screamed at the top of my lungs. And I went and started trying to attack my stepdad. And I was very malnourished and not a big kid, but I tried. And my mom was in the other room, and she heard me screaming and trying, and pretty much hurting myself, trying to hurt him. And she came in, and she screamed at me, pinned me down, and then she remembered it, and then I buried the kitten in my backyard, and then the next day she didn't remember it. She genuinely did not remember it, like at all. Nothing, no recollection. There was nothing there.
Do you believe her? So do you think that that's some sort of like some sort of trauma response, as if she actually saw what was happening but didn't want to acknowledge it, so repressed it? Or do you think that she's just lying?
I do actually think she repressed it. I do believe that, because it was a common denominator in my childhood, all throughout my childhood. Something bad would happen, something traumatizing. She'd be there, sort of. It would almost be like she was on like co-pilot mode during it, and then next day it's gone. And she'd act happy and nothing's there. It was creepy. There's no other word for that one. It was creepy, even as a kid. It also made me question a lot of my reality as a kid.
Yes, the brain has a way of, it'll do anything to protect yourself. And sometimes I think that she truly did realize the gravity realistically, of just what a monster your stepdad was. I think that it broke her reality so much that she just did not want to acknowledge it.
I don't know. That one's a weird one, because I don't know what's wrong with her. There was something wrong with her, but I don't know what was wrong with her. I have dissociative identity disorder. I've been diagnosed with it. I've wondered if she is the same, but I don't know.
Do you know a lot about your mother's childhood by chance?
Not really. I would guess there was abuse. She did not talk about her parents, not in a good light. She would talk about being beaten, but that was as deep as she went. She never spoke to them. My presents that I'd get from them in the mail, she would immediately just throw away and be like, no, you don't talk to these people. They're bad people. We don't do that. And she would, when I was a kid, she'd use like the little kid terms, like they weren't nice to mommy or stuff like that. And, oh, okay. Or they're bullies or, so yes, her childhood wasn't good, but I don't know what exactly was wrong with her childhood because she didn't talk about it. And my dad says that her parents were horrible, but he doesn't really talk about it either because she kept him away from them too.
Do you know anything about your stepdad's nuclear family in his life previous to you?
A little bit, not a lot. My stepdad was Mexican. He came from Mexico, and he was married previous to my mom, and he divorced, and I don't know why. He had a daughter he didn't speak to. He didn't talk to his ex-wife either. So I didn't ever meet or know that half-sister. I don't even consider her a sister. I've never met her or spoken to her or anything. I've never even actually seen a photo of her. I've just heard about her. And it was only a few times. He never talked about his childhood either. He never said anything bad about his parents. He had a few siblings, and I never met them. He was almost secretive about it. You know how, like, when you're talking to a kid and there's some bad things, or, like, just something you don't care to talk about even. Nothing bad, just you don't want to talk about it. And you just kind of blow him off. That's always been his response when I asked about what his history was when I was a kid.
There's a common theme in Hispanic culture, and I'm Honduran, so I'm quite familiar with it. There's a term called machismo, and machismo is essentially extreme masculinity. And in that sense, it's this idea that men kind of run the household, women are subservient to men, and the woman's role is to take care of the children, and the man's role is to work and basically oversee the household in a sense. And this idea can be taken to absolute extremes where men essentially run everything down to the very last centimeter. And did you ever see that kind of behavior from him?
Yes, that you just described my home to a degree. That's how my home was run on my mom's side. Is my mom took care of the kids. He would never take care of us on his own. He never cooked, he never cleaned, he never did any of that. He went to work, he came home, he would spend time with us, and he would take us out and get the fun, quote unquote, fun things. It wasn't quite fun for me because he did other things with me. And that's the way our household was run. My mom was allowed to work, but she wasn't allowed to make more than him. He'd get angry if she tried to stand up to him. And my mom's always been I think I'm a lot like her in this way. If we get nervous, we shut down. And it's not a good family trait. I'm not going to lie. It's something I've been working hard on, but I don't think she ever did. So when we get nervous, we shut down.
The idea of machismo is essentially to push that onto women, to make women subservient. So it makes sense that at that point, once this idea is actually implemented into a household, the presence of the father, of the man in the house, is paralyzing when they're upset.
Oh, God. Yes.
It's absolutely, it's frightening because your whole life at that point, if machismo is done properly, well, properly in the sense of, in the evil sense, it's designed to paralyze and to make sure that the man has absolute power. Also, side question too, can I ask what color his skin tone was?
He was darker. He had a darker brown. I'm not gonna lie, he was a handsome guy. He was a darker brown. He had a shaved black head with the classic mustache. He wasn't a bad looking guy. He was very well built as well. He was a boxer.
That's absolutely terrifying. And
yes.
It's terrifying because, he, as you said before, he was smart, and he also had a level of presenting himself to be a normal person.
Yeah. The only thing that made him not intimidating was he was a bit shorter. As an adult, I'd probably be taller than him, but he towered over me as a kid, and because I was a kid. But that was probably the only thing that made him also go under the radar, which kind of is shitty.
Could I also ask what skin tone your mother was?
My mom and me are both pale as the moon. We're both very, very, very pale. I'm practically albino.
So the reason why I'm asking these questions is because Hispanic culture, there's a lot of ideas rooted in a lot of the culture, particularly that of Central America and of course Mexico is part of Central America, which is why I'm asking so many questions. I figured if he bought into this idea of machismo, he'd probably buy into the ideas of somewhat of colorism. And the reason why I bring that up is because it's seen, particularly that in Central America, that the whiter you are, the more beautiful or the more precious you can
Really?
be.
I always thought the opposite, actually. My mom and me got a lot of criticism, actually, for being with him because we're white. We were pale. They wanted him to marry a Mexican woman, and we're we're as pale as you can get. We're not Mexican. Seriously, me and my mom, for makeup, we had to always go to the lightest skin tone available. That's just what I kept always getting told by his family, though.
Yes, maintaining culture is also a huge part. They likely wanted him to marry a Mexican woman so that he could continue the culture and continue, teach the kids Spanish and so on and so forth. In a sense, that's a huge thing amongst Hispanics, being able to pass on this culture. But there's still this underlying idea that it's prevalent throughout these countries that the whiter you are or the whiter of a Mexican or whatever it may be, the more precious you are. And I was just wondering and asking these questions because a lot of I'm kind of looking at it from a sociocultural perspective as to why he was the way that
Oh
he
no,
was.
that's an angle I've never considered, to be honest. So it's interesting. I've spent many, many, many hours going over details like that and trying to figure him out because I can't figure him out. He has a different thought process than normal. That's easy to tell. He's into kids, first off. He's super meticulous in these abusive things, and he was to me, he was to my mom, but he also had this kindness charm about him, and he could play off and go on. Nobody ever suspected him. Nobody. Even when I became safe and I started talking to people and friends and be like, no, you need to stay away from him, they were so confused. They didn't get it.
Because he could just flip that switch.
Yeah. And it was on an instant.
He knew he had that power over the household, so he knew he could just flip that whenever he wanted and get away with it because he only kept that inside the household. And I'm sure that whenever it came to seeing other people, it was just the kindness switch, and he kept that up.
Oh, absolutely. And we all knew how to respond to it. We were trained to. There's no other word for it. We were trained to it, to respond to him and his moods.
We've talked about his presence and how strong and evil and how confusing his presence was overall in the household and how meticulous he was with his abuses. And so, you've been like sleeping in different houses trying to get away from it when you can, but you've bit your tongue, you've held it down for so long. And so how does this secret that he's made you keep come out?
So, the way it came out was I was in the 8th grade. The Ames test was coming around, so I bet you can figure out what part of the year it was. And I went, and my teacher, I don't know why, but my teacher said, make sure to eat a good meal and study and blah, 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 blah. You know how they are, teachers, and right before Ames. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And I hadn't eaten for at least 2 days at that point. I was freaking hungry. I felt like my stomach was eating itself. I went home that night and I stole a loaf of bread. Our cabinets and kitchen was all locked up. They had a specialized fridge that they bought specifically to keep me out of food. And I learned how to pick locks and for the pantry and the fridge, and I stole a loaf of bread. That was all I took. And I went into my this little closet in our home. It was my quote unquote, it wasn't my room, it was just where I would sleep and stay a lot of the time, so I jokingly called it my room. Anyways, I was in the closet and I was eating, and my stepdad opened the door and he saw me, realized I wasn't supposed to be eating it. He grabbed me by my hair and yanked me up and threw me into the wall. I landed wrong and hit my head and my neck, and I blacked out. I woke up with a super bad headache. Everything hurt, and I had to go to school. In a few hours, and I went to school. I was taking my math aims, and I dropped to the floor and had multiple seizures and just would not stop seizing. Ambulance was obviously called, and I went to the hospital. My mom and my stepdad and my dad and everyone got calls, and they showed up at the hospital with me. I was at the hospital for, almost a month. It's all kind of blurry, the time period. I was very sick also during this. I had strep throat during this as well, and I had an ear infection, and I had not been treated or anything. I was very sick, and I was seizing and having issues, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong entirely. They couldn't figure it out. And so I was there for a very long time. And my mom was only there sometimes, I remember. But my dad stayed with me the entire time. And I remember that very specifically. My dad never left. I found out later that they were worried that I was going to die. They were talking to my dad about, like, hey, you need to be prepared for the worst. And my dad never told me. I was a kid, and I was already doing really bad. I was scared as well, and he never told me. It's a very blurry time period, but as I started getting better, they found out that my spine, my T1 vertebrae, was just destroyed. It was twisted wrong, and my spinal cord was absolutely messed up, and it was just horrible. And I put 2 and 2 together, and I realized I hit my head, because they asked, did you hit your head or fall or whatever? And I put 2 and 2 together, and I had a mental breakdown. I broke. Just total mental breakdown. I wasn't thinking or anything. I started screaming, I don't want to go back. My mom wasn't there when this happened. My stepdad was not there when this happened. And I started screaming, I don't want to go back. I freaked the fuck out. I was freaking out, and I started admitting these things that I had never ever talked about to my dad. He didn't want to show it, but you could just see my dad break.
Was your
and
stepdad in the room when this was happening?
No. My stepdad and my mom they would visit me in the hospital, but they never stayed there. It was just my real dad.
When your stepdad visited, we've talked about these cues and whatnot. Did he ever, like, have a cue that was telling you, like, to keep your mouth shut?
Oh, absolutely. You know that look that you get from, like, your parents where they're like, shut up, but you're in public? He'd give me that. Or he had this hand signal. It was like a very subtle slicing motion, and that meant quiet, or change the subject, or stop. And that was my hand signal, is just stop. And
you're trained to look for that, too.
Yes. I have a bad habit of, even now, I'll watch your hands. I'm a little bit more in tune with that for that reason. And but he wasn't there during this, and I was told that I was going to get to go back home. I just freaked out, and I'm like, no! And so, obviously, the staff and hospitals like, okay, we're going to lock this kid down. We're going to respond to this. And they did a fantastic job of that. I'm not going to lie. They did great. I hated it as a kid, but they did great now that I think about it as an adult. But it was very scary as a kid. They did rape kits on me and found my... I know a lot of people think the skin breaks on your virginity and whatever. I can't remember the name of it. But they found that, and it's not supposed to break, technically. It's supposed to be an arch. And mine was just ripped to shreds. They found tears inside of me. They found a bunch of things that were basically scarred over. They were old. I have a lot of scarring that they documented. My hands are mutilated, technically. I have a finger on my right hand, my pinky. And as a punishment as a kid, my mom would shatter my fingers when I was like a toddler. And so one of my fingers is stunted and deformed from it. And my feet are deformed from being stuffed into 2 small shoes, and my toes being stepped on constantly as a punishment or all kinds of stuff. I have a knife scar down my back. They documented all of this. And I would, for the first time in my life, I bluntly told them what each thing was. I was terrified before then to tell them, but they got to hear these pretty horrifying stories. CPS had been called on me many times before because of my dad. He knew something was wrong, but I would never tell him exactly. Or I'd give him hints, but not the full bloody, gory story. And he got it for the first time. I ended up getting put in my dad's house permanently. And later on, I freaked out again. And I'm like, oh God, he's gonna kill me, genuinely kill me, because I've never done something this bad, or he's gonna kill my pets, and he's gonna do this, and all this started running through my head once I came out of my freak out. And I freaked out again. And then I started lying. No, he never did that, and it was so bad. But my situation eventually came out from a friend, and they told my mom and stepdad what I was admitting to. And they were doing it in a concerned kind of way, kind of like, hey, your kid is saying these things. That can't be true, right? I know you guys, kind of deal. And they packed up everything within 2 days. And as the police came and went to go apprehend my stepfather, they found an empty apartment.
Was he ever caught?
No. I never saw them again. That was it.
Your stepdad and mother just disappeared.
With my siblings. Never saw them again.
Did you manage to keep in contact with any of your siblings?
No. I haven't seen or spoken to my siblings since I was 13 when this happened. The last thing I ever spoke to any of them was to my mom, and it was over the call. As she left, in the middle of the night, she left a bunch of my I didn't have a lot. Like my entire wardrobe and my entire objects, they fit into, you know, those little small moving boxes, the small ones. She put everything I owned in that small box, and she put it on my doorstep at my dad's. And she called me and disowned me. And that was the last I ever spoke to her.
Do you think
and she said I'm no daughter of hers.
Does your stepfather have family in Mexico?
Yes, that's where I'd imagine he lives. Well, he lived. I keep an eye on them, to be honest, even now. I'm very terrified of them, to be honest. But they lived in Guadalajara, Mexico for many years, and then this last 3 years they just moved to the edge of Mexico and Texas.
Do you think that they would ever plan to come back to the United States?
They live in Texas, but it's like 5 minutes away from the border. So they do live in the U.S. They're probably living so close to Mexico because that's a quick out, if I had to guess. I'm actually surprised they ever did come back. I never thought they would. And they only did these last 2-3 years. Last I checked up on them.
Have you ever thought about getting them apprehended?
Yeah, I have actually, but the issue with it is my case died. The moment I freaked out again and started lying, my case died. The truth of it is I was scared, and I was a kid, and I didn't realize lying, and I don't think I would have cared if I did realize I was scared, and my case died with that. To be honest, if they had stayed and fought in court over this, I would have lost, because I was a scared kid and I had been so well trained and groomed. I would have just went with it and been like, no, I'm sorry, I lied. And then the plan for that was, if I had planned to kill myself. I had planned to kill myself for a long, long time, and I've attempted several times when I was a kid. The only reason I didn't and I survived was sheer stupid luck, because my brother found me. So if I went back, I wouldn't have survived. That's just the blunt point of it, is I would not have survived. Be it by my own hand or his. He wouldn't have let me make it to 18. He just wouldn't. I knew I was going to die by his hand or mine. So
at this point in your life, I feel like there's I feel like you have a lot of questions. I feel like you have a lot of unanswered questions, and I feel like there's a lot of support for you in this sense. As you've mentioned before, I'm sure that your husband is on the same page with you about all the different things that you discussed.
Absolutely. My husband's amazing. So is my dad. They're both very, very supportive. They're both very, very protective of me, too, because of that. And they both know my history. I'm very selective in who I tell in real life. I've been labeled a monster in the past because they'll see me as damaged, so I'm very selective in that. But my family's very protective, so it helps.
We've talked about the possibility of this apprehension, but, we've talked about also, and I'm very familiar with how frail the legal system is when it comes to these types of issues.
Especially with as long ago as it was for me. Yeah.
But in that same sense, do you think that at a later point in your life, this will catch up to you and you'll want to see some type of justice or or get some type of answers from your mom and that side of your family?
To be honest, no. One of the key points of my therapy was realizing that justice probably will never happen. And so my therapist worked very, 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 very hard on me to come to terms with, can't change the past, but you can improve yourself and come make peace with it, so to speak. I'm still hurt from it. I still have issues from it, both physically and mentally, and I struggle with those still. But I'm at a point in my life where I am happy. I'm happily married with 2 cats, and my in-laws are amazing. I love my in-laws, and I've made peace, and I can live a normal-ish life, which is all I've ever wanted. And I don't think I can ever have kids. My uterus is damaged, and I'm not quite ready mentally, and I'm not quite ready to have kids. We're not ready financially either. But when we are, then we've thought about adopting. But I want to be a good mom. I want to be a good mom. I would never ever want to be like my mother or stepfather. I'd want to be like my dad, someone who loves their kids through everything and will stand up for them and support them through anything. I don't think I'd ever want to ruin that or go back and look at my past when I've made peace with it already.
One of the things that makes this situation so jarring that I particularly don't just understand yet, because I don't have children, but the idea of having a children, one of the most profound aspects of having one is the love that you can have for your child, whether it be through adoption or through actually giving birth or aiding in the birth of your child. The love that comes from that is something that's considered to be otherworldly. It's talked about in literature, all aspects of art throughout human history. It's a different type of love that I have not come to understand yet, because again, I don't have children. In that same sense, where I'm talking about this strong emotional attachment, we can see that in these cases where children are abused and one parent does not know about it, they can become so enraged and so protective that they actually seek to murder or hurt whoever did that to their child because of that love, which is very, and of course, you can hear this very often whenever somebody abuses a child and the parent of said child goes to hurt the other person or ends up killing the other person, even though they may get sentenced for it. A very common response is, I would have done the same thing.
No, I've heard that actually. I don't understand that either. I don't think I ever will, to be honest. I don't have that, I guess, issue. I've worked with many, many kids. I love kids. I love working with kids. As a abuse survivor as well, I've made it a mission partially to put myself into lives that need help. And I've gone to abuse shelters and worked with these children and these women, and it hurts, but you're making a difference, and I've always loved them. There's that love there. It's not the same love, but there's love. You care for them, and you want them to get better and help them. I can't even imagine how much stronger that would be if it was my own kid.
That's the question that I wanted to ask too, is, when your father heard about this, was he on the verge of doing something or committing violence, or what was his reaction?
I don't know about that. I know he was angry, but he never showed that to me, ever. He was very, very careful about that. He was so strong and so careful with me. He was super, super overprotective for years and years and years after. But I get that. It was almost to the point of annoyance, actually, as I got older in my teens. He was very careful about not ever showing me anger, or he would take me to therapy after therapy after therapy, and I needed physical therapy too, so it was doctor after doctor after doctor. And he would always encourage me when I'd burst into tears, or if I'd get angry or scream at him, or I'd have meltdowns. I'd have behavior issues. Like for a long, long time, I'd actually carry knives with me everywhere because I was scared for my life. And so he would encourage me, like, no, you don't need that. You're okay. You're safe. And he'd talk about other ways to protect myself. He introduced me to a set of knives. He's like, we're going to take you to this little thing and you're going to learn self-defense. That way you can protect yourself in the future and you don't need to carry something that could hurt you as well. And he would come up with solutions for me, and it was just, but he never showed anger. He showed sadness. I saw him cry quite a few times, which was jarring. I've always seen my dad as very strong, one of the strongest men I've ever met. And seeing him cry was jarring, but that's all he ever showed. And at least in anger wise, I'm sure he was angry and I'm sure he was tempted to do things, but he never voiced it to me.
He sounds like a very good person.
I admire him still even now.
And I think earlier I was bringing up the subject of pedophiles in general. And there comes a point, as we've discussed, in the spirit of the age, so to speak, during 2020 and onwards, I do feel like mental health is becoming more and more of a topic that's going to be discussed and investigated as humanity progresses into its future. And of course, there's the very taboo subject of pedophiles. And in a sense, I do feel like there is a part of me that's very repulsed by that for what it is. But as I said before, you know, as I was bringing up that kind of socio-cultural perspective as to why your stepfather was doing what he was doing, it is a mental illness. It's something that needs to be corrected. It's something that needs to be addressed for what it is, and it's something that needs to be understood in order to stop it. In that same sense, how do you feel about pedophiles in general after your experience?
Honestly, that has changed throughout my life. From a point of anger, back when this was all very fresh, I hated them. There was no other word. I hated them. I didn't think about anything other than I wish they would all just die. I hated them. And then I got help and got better mentally. And I looked at it from a different perspective. It is a mental illness. It is horrible. It's sad. It's not something that I think that everyone can control that. Like, I guess, I can't control all my sexual likes, even though I don't have that issue. Or kinks, not everyone gets to choose that. I think that it should be addressed more into the mental health. I don't think there's an excuse for it. I've been told that all throughout my therapy. This is the reason, but it doesn't excuse your behavior. I think that fits with them too. You don't get excused for what you've done. You still have to be punished if you do it and take action on those issues. But I feel like that it should not be so taboo to get help. If they are getting help, then there should be more help out there. So I did actually my own research for a while, and I talked to a pedophile online at one point. There was someone answering questions, and he's like, I'm non-offending, but this is what it is. And I started asking questions, and that's actually what kicked off my starting to think about it. There's not a lot of help out there for them. There just isn't, which is horrible. That's what makes cases like mine. And there needs to be more help, because that could save lives, that could save kids, that could save so many women and people, and there's just not help for them. And it's horrifying.
Very mature, very world-opening response, I'd say, that you gave. With everything that you've discussed and everything that you've told me, I've thought about being in your shoes, at least as much as I possibly could, which I'm sure, is not...
No, you're fine. I understand. I do the same thing with horror novels. You can't put yourself in the situation, but you can imagine.
It's very telling about who you are as a person, obviously in a very positive way, that you're able to come so full circle and almost use this curiosity of yours to an advantage to try to understand what happened. And not only that, but you've even begun to sympathize and empathize and try to understand the other side, which I'm sure has gave you some type of peace to yourself. But the fact that you're able to do that is just like, I think in the same sense that your stepfather is proof of evil, I think that you and your actions and willingness to understand is proof of good.
I like to think so. For a very, very, very long time, I saw myself as damaged. And there was just damaged. I would never be as good, or like I said, I hated them for a long time. I was a very hateful, angry person for a very long time. But my dad got me help, and I credit him with the reason I'm me, the reason I've become me, and that I can do that.
I think I'm actually coming up on probably my last question, and my last question is, to any, what's your advice and your thoughts to anybody who was abused as a child? What would you tell them on how to approach life growing up as somebody who survived it?
There's hope. There's hope. For a long time, I actually did try to kill myself even after getting saved. Like I said, I saw myself as damaged and hurt and broken, and they ruined me, and there's hope. Things get better. It doesn't always seem like it, and sometimes it's years. You have to actively get help, though. Go to therapy and reach out to loved ones and stand up for yourself. And it's hard. It's so, so hard. And it hurts. And there's times where you feel like at your lowest low. And it's hard, and that's okay. You can sometimes take a break, take that shower, sleep the day away. It's okay. And it hurts, but it gets better. There are people out there that the world's not all bad. There are beautiful people out there that will love you just the way that your abusers and hated you. You can get better. I would tell them that. And things will be okay. Maybe not right now, but they will be. You just have to reach for it.